After the raid on Lindisfarne in 793, many in Anglo-Saxon England hoped it was an isolated event. But it wasn't. The attack marked the beginning of a pattern that would continue for decades. That single raid sent ripples of fear across the Christian world. In the years that followed, Viking raids became more frequent, more organized, and more widespread. These early Norse raids were not part of a formal invasion. Instead, they were carried out by small bands of warriors who used fast ships to strike quickly and escape before any resistance could form. In 794, just 1 year after Lindisfarne, another monastery in the north at Jarrow was attacked. Jarrow had also been a center of learning and religious activity. Its destruction showed that the Vikings had no intention of stopping. They were targeting not just random settlements, but important religious sites that were known for their wealth and lack of defenses. In the following decades, raids increased in both frequency and reach. The Norsemen began expanding southward, testing new territories and learning more about the landscape of Anglo-Saxon England. By the early 9th century, they were raiding along the coasts of Wessex, Kent, and East Anglia. In 835, they attacked the Isle of Sheppey off the coast of Kent, marking one of the first recorded Viking raids in the south of England. 2 years later, in 837, the Vikings returned to the southern coast. This time they encountered resistance. King Egbert of Wessex led his forces against them at Carhampton in Somerset. Though details are limited, the chronicle records the encounter, showing that some Anglo-Saxon rulers were now trying to mount defenses. But the Vikings were not easy opponents. Their hit-and-run tactics, mobility at sea, and lack of a permanent base in England made them hard to track and harder to fight. Even when kings like Egbert engaged them directly, it was difficult to prevent future raids. As these attacks continued, they began to affect not only the religious communities, but also the population at large. Coastal settlements, often small and poorly defended, were frequent targets. People began to abandon these areas. Trade routes were disrupted. Fishing villages were no longer safe. The psychological effect of these raids was just as damaging as the physical destruction. For many Anglo-Saxons, the sea, once a source of trade and travel, now represented danger and death. Over time, the Vikings refined their strategies. They began to raid during the summer and returned to Scandinavia in the winter, a cycle that allowed them to strike repeatedly while avoiding long-term occupation or battle with large forces. They learned where the richest targets were, how to navigate England's rivers, and which kingdoms were weaker than others. As their knowledge of the land improved, they began sailing deeper inland, no longer limiting themselves to coastal raids. In 841, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle notes another wave of attacks along the south coast. In 842, a particularly violent raid took place in London and Rochester, where the Chronicle speaks of a great slaughter. Despite the growing number of raids, England remained divided. The major kingdoms, Wessex in the south, Mercia in the Midlands, Northumbria in the north, and East Anglia in the east, were not united in their defense. Each king dealt with the Viking threat in his own way, and there was little cooperation between them. Some kingdoms tried to negotiate or pay tribute. Others focused on defending key areas, but with limited resources and no central authority, their responses were mostly reactive, not strategic. Religious life also changed during this time. The church had once been a central part of everyday life in Anglo-Saxon England. Now, many monks and priests abandoned their monasteries or moved inland in search of safety. Monastic libraries were looted or destroyed. Valuable manuscripts were lost. By the mid-9th century, it was clear that the Viking threat was not just a passing problem. The attacks had become a normal part of life for many living near the coasts and rivers. Anglo-Saxon England had entered a new phase. The Norsemen had moved from raiding occasionally to raiding regularly, and the kingdoms of England were still struggling to mount a coordinated or effective defense. But even then, these were still raids, fast, destructive, and temporary. What came next would be something much more serious. A new kind of force was forming across the sea, larger, more organized, and with different goals.